Hello to everyone again, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ruxandra Bujor. I work with the Global CCCM Cluster team. Today, I will be your moderator, and I'm joined here by the Global Cluster lead agency representatives, specifically on UNHCR side, Sakura Atsumi, the head of operational and solution support service in the Department of Resilience and Solutions. On IOM side, we have here Federico Soda, the Director of Humanitarian Response and Recovery Department. To his left, we have the Global Cluster Coordinators, Derhayo and Clementine Favier. Colleagues, today we will discuss, we'll have from the Global Cluster lead agency representatives, we will have a few introductory remarks. So we'll start as such, followed by going into the details of the strategy by the Global Cluster coordinators respectively. Again, if you'd like to have your questions answered at the end of today's session, we do have an opportunity to take some questions. Please put them in the Q&A box. We will try to respond to as many as possible. Of course, whatever time permits, we'll try to accommodate. However, the questions that we would not be able to respond to today will be responded to in writing through a document that will be shared with you alongside the recording of this session. So please feel encouraged to present yourselves, the agency you represent, where you're writing us from, and pose your question in the Q&A box. Now, with no further delay, I would kindly invite the opening remarks from our Global Cluster Lead Agency representatives, starting with Sakura.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. A big warm welcome to all of you today. And again, apologies for the technical issues that we have been having. We're actually very much delighted to see such a huge turnout actually for this launch, much more than I think we have ever expected. We're all here today to proudly launch the new Global Camp Coordination Camp Management Cluster Strategy covering the period of 2025 to 2029. This is a jointly owned strategy, and we would like to take the opportunity to thank all of you for contributing to the extensive discussions that took place. This strategy aims to address the complexities of internal displacement, taking into account all the evolving trends and dynamics. As you are very well aware, as of end of 2023, a staggering 75.9 million people were internally displaced worldwide. And this number continues to surge as more are forced to flee due to conflict, violence, and disasters. In the last 5 years alone, the number of internally displaced persons has grown by 50%. 40% of these IDPs reside in sites, both informal and formal, and they are surrounded by the communities that host them, who are often in need as well. Informal sites pose higher risks such as gender-based violence, exploitation, and environmental degradation, all of which must be mitigated. In this context, there remains a heightened need for the CCCM cluster partners to continue their efforts to provide dignified support and, whenever feasible, pave the way for sustainable solutions. Beyond emergency relief, the strategy prioritizes long-term solutions for displaced populations, including through promoting alternatives to camps, accelerating localization focused on community-based, area-based approaches, and greater participation of displaced population in humanitarian response. This strategy calls for us to develop tailored solutions based on local contexts to prevent the emergence of informal sites and facilitate durable outcomes. The strategy also places a strong emphasis on enhancing resilience in both displaced and host communities through sustainable, climate-smart solutions. It integrates community-based disaster preparedness and environmentally conscious practice into site management, addressing climate-related risks. Climate-smart site planning and disaster preparedness are also vital to ensure the safety and resilience of communities. As such, the strategy recommends a focus on prevention, developing relevant guidance, engaging with host governments and local authorities, as well as monitoring and advocacy in this area. Now I'd like to hand the floor to Mr. Federico Soto from IOM to shed more light on the importance of the strategy.
Thank you very much, Sakura. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. I join Sakura and my colleagues from UNHCR in welcoming you today, and I thank you for joining. One important aspect of this strategy is its alignment with the IASC independent review of the humanitarian response to internal displacement that was published in March of last year. That review emphasizes the need to extend and clarify the mandate of the CCCM to better reflect its role before, during, and after displacement. This strategy, with the review, builds on the global efforts towards predictable, cost-efficient, inclusive humanitarian leadership and response. The strategy articulates a clear mission for the cluster: to engage and empower affected communities to access assistance and seek solutions to displacement. The cluster aims to work with all stakeholders to ensure effective service delivery and safe, dignified living environments. There's a tremendous amount of work to do in this space. The independent review is also critical of top-down approaches that neglect the voices and needs of internally displaced persons, often leaving them powerless and marginalized. By promoting local leadership, fostering community engagement, ensuring IDP participation, and proactively addressing risks, notably of gender-based violence, the cluster's strategy responds to the report's recommendations to create a more accountable and inclusive humanitarian system. This is essential to enabling displaced communities to transition towards durable solutions. The strategy envisions that the future will be local. Aligning with global localization effort, it empowers displaced populations, host communities, and local organizations to lead response, actively engage in decision-making, and site management. Finally, this strategy represents our shared commitment to humanitarian principles and innovative solutions. The CCCM sector is cross-cutting and coordinates closely with a wide range of sectors and actors. We urge stakeholders to work with us to empower and protect displaced populations, to overcome displacement, and achieve durable solutions. Thank you again for joining us today, and back to you.
Thank you very much for the remarks. Much appreciated. We will now dive into the details of the strategy led by our two global cluster coordinators there.
Thank you. Thank you, Roxandra. Thank you, Sakura and Federico. We will try to bridge the time that we have lost by going fast, but not too fast, through the presentation, underlining some points that the lead agencies have mentioned about this strategy. First of all, I wanted to present, and I hope that it is seen on screen, the consultation process that we have undertaken to develop this strategy. It is really important, as Sakura mentioned, that we are proud to tell everyone that this is a very, very joint strategy. It went through extensive levels and layers of consultation. It is informed by the experiences of the cluster coordinators, not only the CCCM cluster, but also the other cluster coordinators, as well as the members and the partners who are in direct touch with the internally displaced persons in nearly 30 operations. Few steps to inform you on the consultation is first the sessions. We have organized multiple sessions through 2023 and 2024. We have consulted the partners who participated in the annual meetings in these 2 years. And of course, as many of you know, that we have had an independent consultant that was recruited particularly for over a year to lead these consultations. The second was a survey to make sure that we will also have the feedback from those who were not able to join us in person through these events and the consultations. We have organized a survey with more than 71 inputs that came in 2 languages, in both English and French. 4 workshops were organized that were attended by 48 cluster coordinators and operational partners. The cluster coordinators have been representing more than 600 national and international organizations, as well as their national partners, and again, their direct engagement with the affected population, the IDPs and host communities in the areas where we have sites and camps were brought us through these consultations. We have, through again, the consultant, we have carried out 24 interviews with the stakeholders, including member states, donors, of course, local organizations and civil society organizations, and many clusters, other EASC members, as well as our dear OCHA colleagues. Federico mentioned a very important point on the independent EASC review that, again, has been very informative. It was also a very useful resource for us as CCCM cluster to rely on and to learn from. Thousands of IDPs were consulted through this process. It has been discussed at multiple levels. Many other stakeholders were involved, and there were some very, very important recommendations that touched upon the CCCM particularly in the EASC review. By the way, I invite again, for those who have not read it, to read it, because it is a useful exercise that was done. I will highlight in particular the recommendation number 17, which says that the CCM cluster mandate should be extended beyond camps to also encompass coordination and management of formal and informal collective IDP sites, which for us means a clarification because we have been doing that already. The recommendation number 23 underlined, and again, as Federico and Sakura mentioned, that the voice of IDPs is really important. And this is, again, really reflected through our community engagement activities. And then the recommendation number 24 states that we have to pilot the establishment of IDP representatives bodies in the few large-scale protracted IDP settings, which is, again, a very important pillar of our 5-year strategy. Just to clarify on the role of the CCCM in the future of the humanitarian work, which we all know that it is something that is evolving because we are also learning from our lessons and seeing how the situation is becoming definitely more complicated. So our role is, first of all, and we would like to keep underlining that because sometimes it creates some misunderstanding, that we keep on seeking alternatives to camps. It is really important that we don't encourage camps. And we always say in the countries where we had CCCM operations, coordinations active, we always had less IDP sites than they would have been without CCCM, because we are able to advocate with the different actors to clarify that sites are not always the solutions. There are many other solutions that we have to look and seek before we resort to camps. Of course, when there are no other solutions, we have to do what we have to do because we are accountable to the affected population. We work across all sectors. We define ourselves as a cross-cutting cluster. That's why we work with the different actors to be either the coordinator, but also in many cases to play an active role in addressing the needs of the displaced populations in the sites. The community engagement and local leadership is our focal actor and main anchor in this strategy, and this will remain something extremely important for us as CCCM. Once again, the community engagement and the community empowerment remains the key. We will keep focusing on durable solutions from the start, and we underline that again, from the start is very, very important, because sometimes it is too late or it takes even longer time because we missed the focus on the solutions from the early beginnings. And that's what we are going to work with all our partners. We will keep seeking informed, flexible, area-based and collaborative responses to make sure that we are not only focusing on the center of the IDP sites, but also working with the overall communities surrounding the sites and who are also in need for humanitarian assistance, but also to make sure that we are not creating a harm or even contributing to creating any tension between the host communities, the surrounding communities, and the internal displaced persons in sites. Protection and the inclusion of vulnerable groups is very, very important for the cluster as well. Quickly through the scope of the cluster, the budget, of course, the overall envelope of the cluster has been increasing in the past years because first there are more needs, unfortunately, but also there has been more recognition on the role and the importance of the CCCM cluster. In 2024, we are nearly on $350 million as the overall envelope in the humanitarian response plan. Now, this says we are active in 28 countries with few recently activated clusters, and in total we are providing assistance and support in 2024 to 24 million people in these sites, which are 18,000 sites. That's a large number of sites. The areas where we work, for sure, of course, is the crisis, protracted conflict, climate affected locations, and then whenever there are demographic shifts that leads for people to move to the IDP sites. My last slide of the presentation before I hand to my colleague here is to speak for the vision and the mission of the cluster. Again, on the vision, we want to have the communities affected or at risk of displacement have their rights and dignity respected, and they have access to assistance, information, protection, and the solution they require. And on the mission, the cluster engages, empowers affected communities to access assistance and seek solutions to displacement. The cluster works with the stakeholders to ensure effective and accountable service delivery and safe and dignified living environments. Now, I hand the floor to my colleague Clementine. Over to you.
Thanks, Der. Thank you. In terms of location, so as you can see on the screen, the cluster operates in a variety of displacement settings, planned camps, self-settled or informal sites, collective centers, but also reception and evacuation centers or transit sites. Increasingly, as some of you might know, the cluster has adopted area-based site management to work with other displacement-affected communities in accordance with the minimum standard for camp management. That also means that CCM program also support host communities and other affected communities in the geographical area of concern. And this is particularly key as this approach reduces the likelihood of displaced people being pulled toward camps to access services, but also enhance the opportunity for solutions. Building on what my colleague just mentioned, we also wanted to clarify or reiterate the cluster position on camps. It is widely recognized that once established, planned camp frequently outlive their planned existence and can cause significant negative impacts. Just to mention a few, the dependency on aid and the need for quite extensive and sustained investment over the years, alienation, which can cause social cohesion issues that will later on impact solution, or protection and health risk, as we saw in the past few years. It is, though, important to mention that the establishment of planned camps is a prerogative of governments and national authorities. As such, the cluster takes a comprehensive approach to displacement, always considering, as said, planned camp as last resort, advocating to authorities for alternative to planned camp, and in the case they are established, working to mitigate with authorities the negative effects. We need to acknowledge that whether in planned or informal sites, displaced communities living in collective setting demonstrate in many cases acute needs that the cluster has an imperative to respond to. As a renewed commitment, this Global CCCM Cluster Strategy is underpinned by 4 strategic priorities that will guide the work of the CCCM cluster moving forwards. They will apply to everyone that works within the sector, both at global and local level. And we think it's quite important that these priorities are kept in mind as they will help the cluster and partners to prioritize and take decisions, but also allocate efforts and resources in a period that we all know will be quite difficult in that front. As you can see, the Global CCCM cluster will have 4 strategic priorities moving forward. First, providing comprehensive response to displacement crises that promote alternative to camps. Second, increase pathway to solutions for displaced community. Third, accelerate localization through ownership and decision-making. And fourth, promote and facilitate greater agency for displacement-affected community to shape humanitarian response. So I will now take you through the 8 key areas of focus of the cluster and detailed shortly each of the area. We do encourage you to read the full document. There are much more in the document, so we just highlighted a few points in that document. On alternative to camp and building on what was already mentioned, the cluster will continue to undertake preparedness activity and support camp-based population when absolutely necessary, but will focus on seeking alternative to camp and expand area-based site management. A good example is the work that is being done on the facilitation of the inclusion of IDP in host community by facilitating and fostering community engagement, as well as working with partners on social cohesion and local infrastructure development. Effort will be made towards united advocacy, working with other global clusters, OCHA and solution actors to encourage government to take decisions that prevent displacement and reduce the reliance on camps. Solution will also be a core part of the cluster program from the start of the response onwards. I think we know that increasing displacement figures as well as reducing resources highlight the need to better integrate solution from the start of response. And as such, alongside other clusters, we will support a community-led transition. We'll focus on working with communities to transition from emergency relief to self-reliance much sooner than in the past. In terms of collaboration, we'll also support and engage in the early establishment of the Durable Solution Working Group at national levels. But we also, as a generative sector, can and want to contribute by providing information to help inform solution options for IDPs in countries. We also acknowledge that partnership with peace and development actors will be key to address main barriers to solution, notably only to mention a few regarding livelihoods or documentation. A key objective of the cluster remains to ensure the engagement of communities and IDPs, but also to ensure that the CCCM cluster work is integrated within the wider humanitarian coordination structure. The CCCM cluster remain one of the primary interlocutors between communities and displaced population and the humanitarian community. As such, community engagement, listening and mobilizing community will remain at the heart of the work of the cluster. We know that it is key to IDP's agencies, but also to generate important and key qualitative information on the needs, intention of displaced community. We also know that this leads to an improved accountability, more localized response, but also earlier identification of possible solution. We'll also continue to prioritize inclusive approaches that address the specific needs and risk of vulnerable population, such as mitigating the risk of gender-based violence, which has been a key priority of the sector over the past years, as well as the promotion of the participation and representation of marginalized groups, for example. The cluster will also continue to improve local and national capacity to lead and own response to displacement, and that ties back to some of the points made by there earlier on localization. We want to promote local leadership through the diversification of cluster members, and that's true both at global and national levels, but also facilitate transition via the more systematic development of transition plans and shift the role of the cluster from a more manager to a more advisory role from day one. We also are investing increasingly in strengthening the capacity of local and national actors to effectively coordinate and manage CCCM activities and programs. The cluster will continue to invest in information management and accountability system to improve response. We have an important role to play in the continued enhancement of humanitarian response through data and information sharing. As such, we know that several of the core activity of the CCCM cluster and partners drive quality and accountability through service monitoring, information generation, but also sharing feedback and holding duty bearers into account through the complaint and feedback mechanism that CCCM actors roll out in many countries. We will also continue to work across sectors to ensure coordination of integrated life-saving services at site and area level. For example, and this is also the core of the sector, but we'll continue to lead site and area level operational coordination and continue efforts to align with local and national coordination structure. We'll also continue to facilitate support through the referrals, prioritizing the cluster role as a connector rather than a deliverer, helping community to access support through referral to national and international service provider. We also want to uphold standards and increase the application of the minimum standard on camp management, but also leverage them for increased advocacy. In terms of adaptation to climate change, the main objective of the cluster is to help community prepare for and adapt to the impact of climate change. As such, we will take action to prepare for, but also assess and mitigate these hazards to ensure the safety and resilience of community and their living condition. An example of this, but there are many more, is that we will work on established guidance on early warning system in site that detect imminent hazard and can trigger preparedness and response in a timely manner within displacement sites. We also want to advocate on behalf of displacement affected community and amplify their voice in local and national climate adaptation policy and decision-making processes. Finally, the cluster will continue to work with community to mitigate risk and enable protective, safe, and dignified environments. We know that overcrowding, in some cases, a lack of site plan, but also, as mentioned earlier, the frequent exposure to environmental degradation can create very hazardous living conditions in sites. As such, we will continue to support communities to improve living environment and mainstream environmental consideration, notably through the implementation of disaster risk reduction program to enhance the resilience of displaced and host community. As you can see, this new strategy is a big step in a clear and coherent communication on the cluster role, mandate, but also contribution to the humanitarian response and structure. As such, it is quite a big change that will require some key enabling factors. Notably, we are already having a significant investment in capacity building, bringing new skills to the sector, but also expanding partnership to new actors and stakeholders. And here, I think I'm notably thinking to local actors that tends to be the first responder in many cases. So I think, again, as mentioned earlier, we'll have greater effort to include and work with local and national organizations. So I will stop here. Thank you very much. And I will hand over back to Ruxandra.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for the insightful presentations. Thank you once again. We will now take some of the questions that were put in the chat and in the Q&A box. There were many. To reiterate, we won't be able to address all of them. However, we will address them in writing following this webinar session, along with the recording. We would like to start with one of the questions, if I may choose. And colleagues, please feel free to react as you may see fit. I would like to start with the question related to balancing the need for planned camps. So the question is, how does the strategy plan to effectively balance the immediate need for planned camps during emergencies with the long-term goal of promoting alternatives to camps and fostering self-reliance among displaced communities? Very good question. Thank you very much. Colleagues?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. To answer the question on the planned camps, as we have been doing, and I think it's really important to clarify that by no means we want to tell that by focusing on solutions, we don't want to support the planned camps. Sometimes, in exceptional measures, which are many, by the way, we acknowledge that there is a need for planned camps to be established, and there will be a need for that one. And we will support that to the extent necessary. But in the meantime, from day number one, and even before that, with all our cluster coordinators in the field, through our advocacy messages with the states, with the different actors, we want to ensure that the IDPs will have resilience. So as soon as possible, and whenever there's an opportunity and chance, the IDPs will leave these sites. Clearly, from the beginning, we want to focus on solution-oriented programming, even through providing camp management services in some cases, and again, in necessary situation. But in the same day as we are doing the management, we want to leverage empowering the local resources and fostering the self-reliance. Back to you, Ruxandra, if we have other questions.
Thank you very much there for your response. I will move to a following question on localization. And again, thank you very much for the multitude of questions that you've raised, colleagues. Specifically, what steps are being taken to ensure that local actors and displaced communities have the resources, skills, and leadership opportunities needed to drive localized responses and take ownership of displacement solutions? Sorry. Colleagues who would like to address this question?
I will wait for that. Sorry. Thank you so much. No, thanks a lot for the question. It is indeed quite a big question, and I know it's not only in the Global CCM cluster, it's a question that's triggering quite a lot of discussion. And I think it's complex, but I guess it's an answer that has multiple parts. I think first, we need to make an effort to embed CCCM activities within national policies. And I think, and we see it well, for example, in disaster displacement-prone country, how working on preparedness before a displacement happen, and by, for example, strengthening the capacity of local actors and local authorities is key to ensure that when displacement does happen, that they are able to respond as first responder and to reduce reliance on international actors or United Nations as a whole. I think beyond the capacity strengthening, I think we should also mention, which are key and come back a lot when we talk about localization, is I think it's also supporting national actors with funding opportunities, but also opportunity, for example, through secondments, to experience cluster coordination role at subnational or national level, or other key role, for example, as IM or information management for clusters. I think, and as it was mentioned earlier, and I think it's an ongoing process, is how can we ensure that we have more diversified and more large cluster members, not only at global level, but also at national level, but also ensure that these actors are able to have a meaningful participation and have a voice in the decision-making of the cluster. So I think these are some of the points that we have been looking as part of the strategy development and as we transform the strategy in a very concrete work plan on some of the points that we're aiming to work with. I think we are also acknowledging that in some cases, tailored guidance will be required for local actors to help them, be more involved in some of the decision-making processes, and that's another example that I would cite to answer this question.
Thank you very much, Clementine, and thank you for the colleague also who posed this question. For the sake of time, colleagues, we will take one final question, if that's all right. Specifically, considering the increasing impact of climate change on displacement, what specific measures are included in the strategy to ensure preparedness and mitigation of climate-induced risks? And how will these align with national climate resilience policies? Thank you for that question. It's a very, very good one. Colleagues, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, colleagues, for passing the mic. One of the many important questions that keeps reoccurring at all times, and we keep on discussing every day. Even today, we have discussed the climate impact on displacement. It sometimes really requires a lot of unpacking because there are multiple dimensions for this on IDPs and IDP size in particular, not just a simplistic one, because sometimes IDPs simply the reason of displacement is over, but they cannot return due to climate aspects. Climate causes lots of conflicts, and conflicts cause displacements, etc. And I think there are many ways of dealing with this, and one of them, and the main, is for us is by collaborating with the national authorities, the key stakeholders in the respective operations and the countries where we are working in. It is really important to strengthen the climate resilience policies, which we keep on working, and I think many of us are in touch with the operations on the policies, on what exactly are we learning, and also sharing the best practices among each other. It will be really important that the cluster keeps on empowering the disaster risk reduction efforts at all levels. So from the beginning, we are able to at least forecast some parts of the climate impact on the displacement and the work with the partners, whether local authorities or local communities in most of the cases as well, to mitigate these risks. And again, this becomes a very joint owned risk, and multiple agencies, states are working to mitigate. So we are part of it, and we accept that we are a very active player in that sector as well. Back to you, Ruxandra.
Thank you very much, Darren. And again, colleagues, thank you very much for all of your very interesting questions. We duly note once more all of your questions. They're all very, very good, and we'd like to be able to respond to all of them, and indeed we will. We will compile them into a document and provide you in written form subsequently responses alongside the recording of this meeting. We do note your questions with relation to transition, and indeed we do intend on tackling that. Also, we note that a lot of the content that you've heard today is rather new, and potentially further development may be required. So if your agency is interested in further details and the conversation with us on that, we're very, very happy to support, and please feel free to contact any of us for this type of engagement. Additionally, well, we've learned quite a lot today, and hopefully also moving forward. I'd like to, for the sake of time, thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much to all of our speakers for their contributions and their insightful, interesting remarks. Again, a big thank you to everyone attending. The recording and further discussions, responses to your answers will be shared. I have also shared in the chat information with relation to an upcoming webinar unpacking the community engagement aspect in practice. You're very welcome to join that as well. With that, colleagues, thank you for attending. Thank you once again to the speakers, and have a lovely afternoon, rest of the day. Bye, everyone.